Now, actually, that leads to a good question. I think if we just an audience question about sort of product ops and a product manager, what are the, not really roles and responsibilities, every company is slightly different, but what are the boundaries and the focuses in your experience that's working out well? When it became sort of not great, when these boundaries are crossed, right? So there's definitely P2s that you kind of more overlap. What are the boundaries you think that it should be fairly clearly defined once you have that role versus a product manager and product ops?
It's kind of funny, but anybody who's heard one of the team members from Farfetch, where I used to work, we all say it in a simple way. It's focusing on the how rather than the what, right? So it's focusing on how the team works, on how the team responds, on how the team makes decisions. It's a lot on the how, on how we build the product. Whereas with the product managers, they're focusing on the what, right? What is the product you're building? What is the problems you're solving? And it's focusing a lot on that. And that's how I create that distance between the two. And even earlier today, I was talking to someone who was thinking about implementing some ops roles in the company. And I told him, look, the truth of the matter is you're going to have to negotiate because there are people doing those ops roles. And now you have to negotiate that to take that away from them because there is that overlap. And now suddenly you won't be able to have that overlap. So I think I like to keep it in that simple way, right? Because it's very simple. If someone comes up to me and asks me, oh, look, I'm having this problem with the product and everything like that, or the customer, and I'm like, okay, how would you solve that problem? And I can guide them through that problem, but I won't tell them, do this with the product. That's the head of product, the director of product, that will give them their guidance, not me per se.
Right.
Yeah, and I think the boundaries are really interesting. I mean, I think anything that, I think this is also maybe an unpopular opinion around, like, I believe product management has been very much like a glue type of role a lot of the time. And I do think that product operations is also a glue role in the sense we're constantly, it's amorphous and renegotiated all the time, right? And I think that's something that happens with a lot of roles that are focused on uncertainty. I think if you can write down 100% of the job requirements or specific things that a product ops person would do, you're probably like boxing yourself into a place that doesn't allow you to now adapt to the circumstances. And so I think some of the key things that I think the boundary that is most concerning to me is when it turns into, basically bullshit work. And so from the standpoint of product ops is not there to do the job that product managers do not want to do. Right? That's not what we're here for. And I think that there's borderline cases where that starts to happen. And so maybe like, how do you identify that? Like, I tell the story about how when I was a program manager at Microsoft, which basically is like product management with a little bit of like Gantt charts, right, involved. And this was like a long time ago too. But like, we would joke that my job was to get the engineers sodas when they were staying late, right? Or order pizza for them. And it was half joking because I actually had to do that as well as stick around. And like, what was my job to be there was just like hang out. Like I didn't do anything other than like soldiering essentially for the fact that everybody else was there late because they were trying to meet some deadline. And I had to answer a question occasionally. So I think like, the part around product ops being helpful, right, is that we want to make sure that people don't make the same mistakes multiple times. We want to make sure that they're not getting caught up in like the bureaucracy of the system, or that they're, doing something over and over again that is in some way causing them extra pain or work. And right, that's why I think a lot of like early product ops, like the idea of Pendo or Melissa Perry focusing on things like collecting qualitative and quantitative results somewhere, is because they didn't have great partners in those companies that were data scientists or user researchers, right? And so I think that's the thing, is like, we need to adapt to whatever the problems are in making people most effective as product managers. And that will usually be things that I think are related to like inside of Cognizant, a lot of the stuff that I've been trying, that has been like the highest priority recently, has been how do we thread all of the competencies and levels for product managers, which, by the way, I actually think the competencies and levels for product managers should be the same for product operations. We just replace customer with PM in every one of those places, basically. So that's one thing that I'll say out there. But like the way that we thread that through recruiting and interviewing, performance evaluation, giving feedback, promotion, and then also the idea of like enablement and training, trying to standardize that so that people understand across the board, like how are these things involving all of these different stages of their career within Cognizant is like a very high priority, right? And so, but what things are not a priority is like, user research is kind of nascent. So yes, I'm trying to teach people to do a better job at that, but they don't do a lot of it inside their clients. Like, and if they do, usually they're working with a designer or a researcher. And so that idea of like collecting all of the research somewhere is just not as valuable to our team. So yeah, I mean, I think there is a line definitely, and it's when a product manager is like, I just don't feel like formatting this document. Hey, product ops person, can you help me format this document? Which in design ops is probably the same thing. Design ops is like, can you help me reformat this slide deck? Like, no, I will not help you do that. And so that's what I think we need.
Yeah, totally. Product ops is not a team admin, right? So that's just putting like really bluntly. I'm not here to take meeting notes. I'm not scheduling meetings for you, and I'm not gonna. You guys not talking, I'm not going to go there. But sometimes when people are not talking, we kind of help out as well, right? So ultimately, you think about it, product ops is kind of like the enablers. I think, house and the careers and process, all that stuff. And because they're really thinking about the categories of things, it's like, okay, how do I enable people? How do I enable the process? How do I enable the technology and systems and platforms? So that's like underlying stuff. And I think that it's interesting where once you have a product ops, the first things you do is the people everyone in the product organization come to you to ask for random stuff, right? And then the next thing you know is that everyone in the company come to you, ask for random stuff related to product. Now, I think in some ways, the product ops do play a role, almost you think about it, either traffic cop or like sort of the orchestra person, right? So first, people, especially when you have product organizations start to get bigger, there's internal facing thing. What's our cadences? Where the product teams are having challenges and doing really well, which team does well in one area as the others. So that's definitely something. So just enable the team to be effective and performant and better. The second part of that is really like in a way where nobody, like product ops really in this unique role, I don't think we talk enough about it, is product managers focus on their areas, the goals, their areas, the customers, their areas, the product, their areas, and their own universe connect to the others, but not so much as like connect to the other product managers. So there's a big part of the product manager, product team. Like I'm not saying product team is a vertical full stack team. We're thinking about it, like you have a director, have a bunch of product managers, have a director or VPs, and they are kind of their little kingdoms, right? So sometimes we're joking, like they're the kayakers, get on the same boat in a way, because that's what Dragonboat came through. But the point is that modern product are not built in a way that's done by one team. If you kind of not thinking across the portfolio, then there's a big challenge in terms of, we call it an org chart on your product, right? So you can clearly see there are org charts on the product because there are different focus about different areas, and that just, it's become not acceptable in today's world where it's product centric and user experience centric and all that. So I think that part I wish we hear more, because that's sort of like a phase 3 at PayPal, is really go from enable product team, like country launch, obviously, product team has to launch the country. Who's going to do that? And, then we take that best practice into the others. And then once we get to the second level, we realize we start to have this org chart focus, right? So the checkout teams, focusing on conversion, and then the risk team focus on fraud. But conversions depend on fraud. Fraud is affecting conversion. So who's going to look at them together and then say, okay, we create the frameworks and the rules to help us as a portfolio to say, okay, you cannot dial up your rules on the risk to decline too much transactions so that you don't have a high level of conversion, you overall lose revenue. Or you don't want to lax it so much so that you have a lot of conversion, but the fraudster coming through that has, both impact on our own business and the impact on actually customers. So the product ops now really became like the third level, is to say, how do we see across the portfolio? And then kind of like to say, what really matter, who are not only our core areas of focus, what's our pair of factors. And I think it's interesting, because I'm not sure So Marty Kagan in his book about having sort of empower teams, your own goals, and then one of them is about that you don't own just one goal. You own multiple metrics. They're actually, competing. And that's like, obviously he came from eBay, which is PayPal. We kind of have similar concept, same family, right? And it's really like, I think one of the customer I was advising a while back, right before, well, actually was the time I started Dragonboat, was that we're going through a strategic planning process, and they're saying we have 300 items to prioritize. How do we prioritize them, right? Like, what kind of prioritization method should you use?
And just delete all of them.
There you go backwards, right? So ultimately I have them turn around to say, hey, you know what, you really should think about like what are the problems that are the most important that's affecting you, through all these things out of the way, right? So talk about the problems, like what's the organization, what the problem you care. So end up everyone like at the executive and VPs and director level, they all care slightly different problem. So then we have to align their, what the problems they care the most. So they pick up top 5 problems, right? The areas, and then we figure out how much you really care in terms of put your money where your strategy is, which is resources, right? So then we kind of get people have a conversation. It become not chaos, not a lot of fighting. And that's really like, if say the highest, like one of the higher level of impact of product operations really is to say, hey, when my team get confused on what should we do, because there's some solution always work, but not at all scenarios, all times. And this is really like, not that we set strategy as product ops, we don't, but we help people to see and discuss and to communicate strategy in a way that's understood, that's aligned, and that truly empower your team. You say, these are the 5 problems, help us to solve it. They can come up with, maybe none of the 300 items, maybe 10 out of them, I don't know. But if you don't say these are the 5 problems, nobody can agree on anything, it's chaos. So then we fail, right? We can, we fail. Like chaos is the antithesis of the product ops, right?
Well, yeah, I mean, my tagline in LinkedIn is chaotic good product manager. So I don't know if I 100% agree with you about chaos, but
when I say chaos, it's more around misalignment chaos, not like
alignment is costly, right? Like, I mean, I think that's the thing, is alignment is always a high cost to every organization.
Right.
I mean, I do want to like focus in on one thing that I think is an interesting thing I've seen, right, is this discussion of like, how do we update the team and get them aligned around a strategy versus this idea of actually creation of strategy. Yeah. And I think that there's a lot of like leaders that are not willing to make hard decisions that are out there. And so what they end up doing is not creating the strategy. And exactly. I do see some problems with like product ops people being the ones that are like, well, we have to create the strategy, when the reality is like, no. It is actually the leader's job to do the strategy.
Right, exactly.
Right? And actually every PM right. should do strategy, right? Right. And so I think that you're absolutely right, that it's like, how do we communicate it? How do we get alignment? What is the process by which we discuss and have the right types of like arguments about the strategy? Right?
How do we make sure strategy actually happens?
Yeah, exactly.
Right, at the different level, there's different level strategy, but the first things, like you said, right, is that it's a hard to create a strategy. It's a hard to agree on what problem we try to focus on. And if we just delegate that to teams and say, okay, you guys are empowered, that's bad, right? So the goal of product ops, not only you have to empower your team, enable your team, one of the key things is to make sure the strategic discussion and the uncomfortable discussion happens. And that also that's sort of basically the responsibility for leaders and executives, right? So what we're focusing on and what are the resources and the organization power behind it. You can't say, we're gonna do this 5 thing and you guys figure out how to make it done. No, we still have to have the conversation to say, what does it take to do these 5 things, like achieve these 5 goals, right? What does it take? And it's never comfortable. I mean, obviously PayPal is one of them. I think even at Amazon, right? So you have this you have these initiative process where you have to figure out where are the goals, what are the top 5, 10, whatever areas to focus on, and what do they need to achieve this. Sometimes it's to get resources and roadmaps from the other team. It's not a comfortable conversation, but if it doesn't happen, you can't achieve the goal. Your team is not gonna feel empowered if they need someone else's resources to support them. They feel powerless. So, and that's sort of our observation, is that a lot of organizations say you have empower team, I give you, you have Scrum teams and whatnot, these are your goals. And the team don't feel empowered. Every day they can make progress because I depend on this team, I depend on this team, I depend on this team, and none of them is on their priority list. And every day I spend my time just trying to begging. And, I think about 10 years ago, I was talking to one PMs at one of the events, and she was almost crying, say, what do? I couldn't ship anything. My stakeholders wants this, and I see our customer failing, but my roadmap items not being prioritized by the 16 teams I'm relying on. Like, what do I do? Like, I don't want to do product managers anymore. It's just too stressful. And that's not what we want to happen, right? So product ops need to observe that and understand that really enable your PM to truly be empowered. That means a difficult conversation sometimes with leaders, right? It's not just setting strategy. What do they have to achieve?